We're very glad to have you for yet another edition of the Critical Sustainability Lecture Series. We aim to present ecocentric alternatives to contemporary solutions across sociopolitical, economic, academic, and scientific discourses. With our recent magazine launch, shout out to the Mycelium magazine team, we aim to make eco-critical and sustainable modes of thinking more accessible to our students, staff, and guests, as to emphasize that the struggle for multi-species and ecological justice is never finished. I would like to welcome Dr. Crelis Rammelt, who is today's speaker once again, for which we are beyond grateful. Dr. Crelis Rammelt is an assistant professor in environmental geography and developmental studies at the Department of Geography, Planning and International Development Studies of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Behavior. His research and teaching focus on establishing connections between disciplines primarily in the fields of political ecology, post-development, degrowth, and systems science. His lecture today is titled Unequal Exchange and the Hidden Logic of Global Capitalism.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. And this is a second one in a row, and last time we discussed mostly the ecological dimension of unequal exchange, and now we're going to look at a few other dimensions and try to bring them together, see how far we go. Yeah, I brought my son, so if you wonder who that is, watching the movie there, but you should be okay. Okay, so let's jump into it straight away. Yes, let's jump in straight away. So one of the assumptions with trade and global trade, the sort of conventional assumption is that trade benefits all. We all win through trade, and it's a sort of a handshake. If we didn't agree on the trade, then we would just walk away. So this is a very strong assumption dating from a long time ago, the classical economists, all the way to now. What you see in a lot of agreements on trade in the World Trade Organization, etc. And so this feeling is still very strong. One set of numbers here to start with, it's sort of the superficial financial part of the story, is something called the domestic value added. So it's essentially how much do countries capture from trade at the end of the trade. So let's say if Peru's gold is exported for 45 million, and Peru needs 25 million worth of equipment, as in that it needs to import in order to produce that export, then the profit, let's say at the end, is 20 million, right? So in international trade, that's called domestic value added. That yellow part of the export is what really effectively countries keep in profits from trade, right? So domestic value added is a weird term. It's basically how much money does a country capture through trade. And if we plot that over time, we see that the high-income countries are, way ahead of everyone else, and the gap between the high-income countries and the rest of the world is increasing. China here is rising fast, and the upper middle-income countries are still also, rising in the same speed, but the rest is really well below. And so there's a growing gap in the money that countries capture through trade. Still, sort of the response from classical economists would be, yeah, but look at the blue line, that's the low-income countries, and the lower middle-income countries, the purple ones, the orange and the purple is India. They're still going up, right? So they're still benefiting from trade. So they would say, look, okay, sure, the gains might not be equally distributed, but everybody still benefits from trade. It's still better to do it than not to do it. And unequal exchange is a sort of argument that says, well, there are things that are hidden. There are flows of value, whatever that means, we have to look into that are hidden, that you don't see in trade statistics. I think in terms of financial reporting, this is probably the best one. There's other trade statistics that are even worse, that don't really show at all this sort of inequality even. But the point is that unequal exchange as a theory, as an approach, is trying to say, look, there's things that are hidden. And that's a very Marxist thing to say, that the money is sort of the superficial thing that we can sort of see, but under the hood, like below, there's all these other things that we don't see and that we should look at. And the hypothesis or the statement is that the global south, the periphery countries, the global south, are losing through this approach. And it's a long debate, it's an old debate, with a lot of theoretical roots. It's been around for a while, starting with the Marxist approach at the bottom. So that's really from the, I think already in the 60s, the first, even earlier. I think Grossman was even in the 1930s or something. So it's a theory that started from a Marxist-inspired perspective that there are hidden flows, especially of labor value, meaning of human effort in producing export goods and services, and that this human effort is drained from the global south to produce stuff that ends up in final consumption in the global north. So, and the other way around, of course, there's also products going in the other way around, but that the human effort flowing from south to north is much more than the flow in the other direction. So that the net imports of the global north are positive and growing in terms of labor value. Then the other one is the first one, the post-Keynesian approach, is more related to currency imbalances. I'll explain that in a moment. That there are inequalities in the global financial system that are causing unequal exchange as well. And then the last one that came up more recently, maybe in the last 20, I think the first one was in the late 90s, the first, or a bit earlier, it doesn't matter, the ecological version of this. So not labor value, but environmental, biophysical, material, land use, water use, all these sorts of biophysical flows of inputs into production of goods that then end up being consumed in the global north, and that there's a drain of that as well from south to north. So a very general definition is that it's an exchange, meaning a trade, of non-equivalent, meaning unequal, quantities of value. Value could be labor values, it could be environmental factors, and there's also this currency aspect that I'll talk about. And then the second point in the definition is that you really have to look at all these things together. That I think is still sort of missing in the literature, but or different approaches are claiming that they have the overall picture. But the point is that what if one country is exporting a lot of embodied land, like the land that has been sort of devoted to producing export products. If a lot of that land is embodied in the exports, but in return it gets a lot of water embodied in the products, right? Or labor. So how can we talk about unequal exchange if it's just countries exchanging what they have in abundance? That's also sort of a classical argument in trade. So to think about unequal exchange, we have to look across the board and sort of bring in more and more indicators to make the argument is the argument. I'm not sure if there's something to think about. We can sort of endlessly bring in more and more dimensions of it, and at some point I think we just have to either accept it or maybe not, but yeah. Something to think about as we go through the talk. So I'll take you through some of these perspectives, then we have a pause and a chat about if everything is clear, and then I'll take you through the last steps where and possible integration of the different kinds of flows of unequal exchange. So far so good. If there's any issues or questions, you can also jump in whenever, but this is something I'm doing. That's okay. All right. Okay, so a first one is the currency imbalance. It's immediately also the most complicated one actually to explain, but I'm going to try, and then we'll go to the labor and the material resources. That's a bit more intuitive, I think, to understand. Here's a graph from a paper from Jason Hickel, and he builds on a method that's been around, that's been developed by these post-Keynesians that I mentioned before. And he talks here about a hidden drain from the global south in billions of US dollars to the global north. So a hidden drain in the exports and a loss also through the imports. So these two colors are sort of stacked, right? So this is the total loss, and it consists of losses through expensive imports, whatever that means, and losses through cheap exports. So apparently the south is exporting cheap and importing expensive. And the question is, of course, what does it mean, cheap, expensive, and how do you define that? But so by 2017, according to this study, the South lost about 7% of its GDP, an amount worth about 7% of its GDP. And this drain is hidden, is the story. So why is it hidden? What does it mean, expensive and cheap? This is what's behind it. The idea is that in trade, countries have to access currencies that are accepted in trade, so dollars, yen, euro, etc. A few, really. And there's a sort of dependency theory around this as well, that it's not a coincidence that some high-income countries sort of have control over these currencies, mainly basically the dollar as the main currency that you need for exchange, for trade. So if India wants to buy something, it has to have dollars to pay. To get dollars, either India has to export something and be paid in dollars, or it has to borrow, or it has to go to a currency exchange and buy dollars with rupees. So on the left, you see that if India goes to the exchange office with 79 rupees, it will get $1. This is the official market exchange rate. It's the same that you would get if you are, as a tourist, you have an actual physical dollar and you go to India, you get 79 rupees. But the theory, this graph from Unequal here, is based on combining this with another exchange rate, the purchasing power parity rate, PPP, which says that actually you can buy in India with 79 rupees, you can buy more than you can buy in the US with only $1. So you have to sort of control for that. And there's a whole model behind it that calculates that actually a dollar in the US, maybe you can buy a loaf of bread, and you can buy a loaf of bread in India for 21 rupees. So it's trying to sort of, it's a basket of goods, it's not just a bread, it's like a mix of different things, but it's sort of adjusting for purchasing power, right? Does that make sense? So indeed, you buy less, like it's 21 rupees if you account for what you can buy. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Okay? Yeah? Everyone? Yeah? Okay. Cool. Now, what's the implication of this? And how does it lead to this double loss? Loss through exports and loss through imports for the Global South, in this case for India. You see that, here on the top I explain it. So India effectively exports with a discount, because if the US paid India US prices, India would earn more. US would have to spend more. Because if the US had to buy those same things from another US in terms of the strength of its currency, it would be able to buy less, right? Simply because of this difference in purchasing power. A rich country can buy more from a poor country than it can buy the same goods. It would be more expensive if it had to buy it domestically or from another high-income country. Hope that makes sense. And the other way around as well. So India has to import with paying a surcharge effectively. So if India paid Indian prices to the US, it would spend much less on those imports. And if it bought those same imports from Pakistan or whatever, another country with the same sort of price levels. Yeah? So that's the double loss, and that's what you see here. That's what he's plotting here. And one way that sort of I've approached it here is you take the domestic value added, what I was talking about before. This is the first row is what a country actually earns. The low and lower middle income countries in domestic value added, this was for 2022, earned 1.6 trillion. The high income countries 11.6 trillion. So that's what countries actually earn through trade, or these regions actually earn through trade. UMIC is the upper middle income countries. And then you apply this sort of currency difference to recalculate what the groups would have earned if there were no price level differences. And then you get the sort of equalized domestic value added. There's a little formula behind it, but it's effectively just saying the hypothetical earnings if there were no price level differences, if the currencies were all the same in terms of strength, purchasing power. And then you calculate the difference and you get a sort of unequal exchange from a currency imbalance. So it's simply because, yeah, it's the same. I think you can feel it yourself, right? It's the same sort of weird privilege, you know. Okay, I happen to be born in a high-income country, and I go on a holiday in a low-income country, and suddenly I can buy a lot of stuff. I can be, you know, the big spender. And there's something really unequal and unfair about this. That the other way around, it doesn't work that way. So I have to spend way much more money in the other direction. Yeah. Okay, so this is one way to look at it. Now, the other one is a bit more straightforward. It's simply saying, it's simply looking at, or simply, there's a whole bunch of, again, economic models behind it, input-output tables and international multi-regional input-output tables. So there's a lot of complicated connections trying to calculate these things, but this data is becoming increasingly available, and there's multiple data sets, and they all seem to show the same thing. This is looking at all the raw materials, so all the sand, the coal, the oil, the stones, the biomass. It's looking at all these different material stocks that have been consumed in the whole supply chain of all the products, and then you look at where they end up at the very end. So you can. So it's not. Let's say in the example here. So if the Netherlands imports 10 million tons of camembert, you're not measuring the 10 million tons. You're measuring all the resources that have been used in processes all the way upstream to produce these final camembert. And that might be double, might be 20 million tons of raw materials. So if a country is importing this camembert for local consumption, then it should be assigned as a footprint all these other materials and resources that have been spent along the supply chain. So it's pretty impressive that you can even come up with more global models that calculate this, and I'm sure they're still very rough and estimates, but what it shows is that the high income countries are way above, way beyond everyone else. So if a group is above the line, it's net importing raw materials. So that means that the imports of, it's called raw material equivalence, it's the embodied resources that I was talking about before. And it's also exporting, but it's importing more than it's exporting. So it's a trade balance, but in terms of materials, embodied materials. So the high income countries are on the rise, and there was a sort of down moment of going down after the global financial crisis, but it's sort of growing back up. China is suddenly jumping from being net drained of material resources, maybe after it joined the WTO, maybe other things were going on. It sort of jumped and became a net importer of raw material resources from Africa, likely, and other places. And the rest is below the line. The reference I have there, it also maybe something I don't know if this is something you were wondering, but there's also high-income countries that are exporting a lot of raw materials. So Canada, Australia, high-income countries that are exporting more than they're importing. They are high in income, and they need a sort of separate explanation. They're not suffering from unequal exchange. They're doing very well, and that means you need to also bring in the economic dimension. So I'm sort of jumping ahead, but that's one of the reasons why I think you need to integrate. The story often in the literature on ecological unequal exchange is, the South is being drained by the North, but it's more complicated than that, because you also have countries in the South that are taking in more raw materials than they're exporting. And still they are sort of suffering from this trade, or there's some consequences there. So this is a general picture, and that it needs a lot of this clarification. Then almost there, and then we can have a break and we can sort of listen to some reactions. We can come back to some if you have some questions also. So I was saying that one of the strategies is let's expand to more. So the first one that I showed, this is the raw material equivalence. It includes biomass, fossil fuels, non-metallic minerals, and all the metals and those kinds of things. So it's most of the materials that we use, but there's other things too. So one way to expand it is to look not just at the raw materials, but also at energy, top right, and land, bottom left, and then there's labor. I'll come back to this in a moment. Other studies are expanding to water use. Let me see. Anyway, there's different sort of expansions of this to start to see the pattern, and not just for a few material resources, but more and more and more to make the case, right? Because you might be exporting a lot of land, but importing a lot of water. Is that unequal? But the trend seems to be the same. The pattern seems to be more or less the same for these different indicators. So labor is the last one, and then I'll just check with you if you have any questions. Another one by Jason Hickel is so prolific in this kind of work. So this is embodied labor. The light blue is basically all the labor that the North is either sort of using domestically or trading with other global North countries. And on top of that, you see 36% on top is net appropriate from the global South. Net, right? Meaning that it's accounting for the fact that there's also some labor going from south to north. But the net result is an extra appropriation of labor from the South. So to interpret this graph, you could say it's maybe roughly a third. So that means for every 3 people working in the North to produce exports, for every 3 workers, you have another 1 worker that we sort of import, which means that there's less labor in the global South potentially to provide public services and other things that are needed domestically. So this is going a little bit into the direction of the Marxist perspective, but there's complications here from a Marxist perspective. They would say, yeah, but labor is also more productive in the global North, so how do you account for these kinds of things? There's a whole debate around there too, and then some responses with more quantifications and sort of approaches. It doesn't really change the picture that there is this drain of human effort going from south to north. And I think that the last part will be about integrating these different things. So we have the currency imbalance that is causing something. We have the more biophysical material perspective, and finally we have the labor imbalance. Any questions from you so far that need to be clarified a bit? Yes, thanks. Yeah. What is Canada exporting? I don't know. I know Australia is exporting a lot of coal and timber. Yeah. Biomass as well, maybe. Maybe biomass or embodied biomass in sort of agricultural commodities could be as well. Yeah.
But how does that work with the exchange?
Yeah. So so that you wouldn't see here because what we did in this paper, I didn't add the graphs, but what we did in this paper is actually separate out the net exporting high-income countries and the net importing high-income countries. About 20% of the population in high-income countries live in countries that are net exporting. So it's not, it's not just Canada and Australia. It's like a relatively big group, and about 20-25% of the population living in the low and lower middle-income countries. Living in countries that are net importing, so they're importing more than they're exporting. So these are exceptions that are important to look at, and they only they only become clear, which I will show later on, why they're not sort of suffering from unequal exchange is when you combine the material with the monetary and with the currency imbalance. So maybe in terms of materials, they are sort of being drained of raw materials, but what the benefit, the economic benefits that they get from it are much larger than in a low-income country. Yeah. So that's why we need to combine them. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, the labor imbalance, how precisely does it work? Like, if I'm thinking of people, what is going on the ground in this graph?
Yes, nice, very nice question. I recently also got data, like another data set that actually has that actually knows that you can actually find these flows. So it's in terms of labor employed, so number of people employed, and then you can sort of look at how many hours does someone work on average in a year. So you can express it in sort of hours of work. So it's approached in the same way as this one, meaning it's embodied, meaning that what happens is you have countries that create these input-output tables. It's basically over different sectors, and they're selling stuff to each other. And so it's first starting with the money exchange, and then some of the products then go to exports, but they use maybe a little bit of these inputs from there, and a little bit of inputs from there. So you then connect these national tables to the global tables. So you track all of that. You put that all together in a huge model. And then you have, I forgot the technical term, but you have these environmental factors. So for certain sectors, it's based on a whole bunch of different types of research that are put together. For certain sectors, they know that on average, these countries or these sectors use this much labor to produce this much dollar of output for this sector. So they can add like a labor intensity or carbon intensity or land intensity in that way. So that's all based on research and models that are sort of trying to capture that. And that's how, in the end, you can also, for labor, you can sort of track the whole supply chain of like this mug. You can track it all the way to the moment that somebody got the metals out of the ground from a mine, the workers that were involved in that step, and then track in this way, add up all of the weight in the, all of the labor that was spent in the whole supply chain for this thing that I end up consuming here. Does that make sense?
So it's the same as saying that there's 10 million people working around the world for the Netherlands.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it depends. So, you know, like with carbon emissions, maybe you know that parallel. It depends on how far up the chain you go. Like if you go to like if you just look at the trade of how much the products that the Netherlands gets from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh put this much work in it, it wouldn't capture then also the work maybe that was in India to produce the cotton, that was in another country to produce this. So it depends on the model. And that will be, it will give very different results if you like just go from the direct trading partner to all the way up the supply chain through these complicated models. And so that's really an innovation that you're able to track this all the way to the source. I think I'm now sort of impressed by this capacity. But I thought it was a very good question also because what you see is it's only the formal work. And there's so much work happening in the sphere of the household and within communities. The more, there's also a bit of a Marxist thought, the more a worker is exploited, the more that sort of flows on into the household. That the households with children have to start working and have to start taking up the slack or whatever. So there's a whole invisible work that is not captured in here. And that would be amazing research to sort of see if we can add on to that as well. I think it would make things worse because, yeah. Yeah. Yes, and then you or? Yeah. Okay.
So, I don't know whether I'm asking the very same question, but think of US exporting iPhone to many other countries. So, is the embedded labor in the iPhone is from China? Is considered as being coming from China, or for your equation or for your model?
Yes, definitely. So, and not just China, but China would be mostly assembly. And then China gets a lot of the minerals from Africa. So there's mine workers. There's the mines themselves rely on fuel that they get from another sector where there's some work being done. The fuel, if it's fossil fuel, it comes from another mine somewhere else where people have been working. And through these models, they can sort of add all of that up so that you can calculate at the end of how many hours in total were embodied, right from the beginning when the first materials, the timber was taken out of the plantation or the mineral out of the ground, the first step. Yeah. And this is one method. So you have other methods like life cycle analysis that do it really for a product. So maybe that would have done, like, I'm not sure if it might have been done for like an iPhone or something like that. So so there's some imprecision in these global models. They sort of average things out, they miss certain things. And then the other approach is to go for a product, and then you have life cycle analysis approaches that take a product and track that one. It could be much more precise, but of course it's just one product. So you have different approaches that will reveal a little bit different things. This is more like the global. This works well when you are comparing regions and maybe countries, but at a bigger scale level, where you're sort of putting data together.
And also the additional marginal value that was created out of the labor, in this case, is rest by the export, right? In the second sense, I mean, China is also exporting labor by doing stuff, the sandwich and everything, for example. But then, US is putting on another premium on that.
Yeah.
So also is selling the labor. Yeah. I'm a little confused.
Do you mean so it could be like the iPhone, maybe a lot of the R&D is happening also in the US, and that will be there as well. Yeah. So it's really trying to track the whole supply chain from research and development to production to then marketing and all of those things. Yeah.
I think that's a little bit on that, but I find it interesting the kind of the extra economic means of because going out of the process of exploitation and the process of ecological appropriation of ecological resources, let's say. But then, how would you calculate, for example, labor in social reproduction?
Yeah.
And for example, expropriation of rural communities, right? That is which is kind of another hidden abode or another hidden sphere that Marx didn't talk about that much, and now more neo-Marxists not very much, let's say, no touching feminists.
Exactly. Yeah. That's I'm not sure. So I think I'm not sure how I would approach it, but it's something that comes up a lot in reactions to this, that it's missing a huge part and possibly a much larger part that is even further hidden. The hidden abode behind the hidden abode. Yeah, that's an interesting way to talk about it. I was just talking this morning to some bachelor students that are looking at it. I think case studies would be a way to start. So one of the students wants to look at tea plantations in Sri Lanka, and we have some connections there, and then sort of put this like a lot of reality checks on this. I have a PhD working on lithium extraction in Zimbabwe and export to China, and he's there now, and there's so much more interesting stuff happening. So China is paying Zimbabwe partly in kind, so in lithium. So China comes in with mines and extracts lithium and pays Zimbabwe in lithium, and partly it's paying Zimbabwe in local currency. There's a lot of other additional complications that are so interesting that I think this could be this should probably be one of multiple sort of lenses to make it richer and to understand better what's actually happening in different contexts. And maybe from there may be a more general approach to take, but I feel that there's a lot of value now of case studies, potentially. Yeah?
If you go back to biophysical imbalance, yes. So, because in my project I'm looking into semi-peripheries, or let's say European periphery, but then an international trade world systems is considered semi-periphery. Which is an interesting case, because the country that I'm looking into is exporting wheat. 70 or 80% of Bulgaria is exporting wheat, and some of the top destinations are Algeria, Indonesia, Egypt, as well as some European destinations. And then it's like, okay, what is the role of the semi-periphery? And here, for example, I see that, I mean, I can't really distinguish the colors, but high income is the top one, right?
Yeah.
The top line, and then upper middle income is all the way down. So there's a very big disbalance between the two lines, the two graphs.
Yeah, well spotted. Yeah, so in terms of if we categorize them in this way, most of the exchange happens between the upper middle income countries and the high income countries. So is it so? I don't know. Brazil is considered upper middle. Yeah, Brazil is there. India is taken out here, but India is still considered, I think, lower middle income countries in this categorization. China, well, China is also taken out of the upper middle income, but you will see that a lot of the exchange happens between these groups. But what we also did in this paper is compare it not in absolute terms, but in relative to the domestic extraction of resources. And then it shows it's somewhat different picture that actually, I don't have it here. Oh no, I do have it. I have it in the notes. That it shows that the low-income countries consume 13.3% less than they extract. So anyway, in relative terms, now it doesn't look like much from the low-income countries, but if you compare it to domestic extraction, then it really goes up quite a lot. So a bigger chunk of their domestic resources is being exported away through this system. So that might be a way to sort of look at it a bit more. Yeah, the data sets behind this, the link is there as well. So you can actually you can cluster countries, you can download the ones you want and look at how they exchange, how much they exchange. Okay, should we move to the last bit? Yes, I think that will manage. All right, so one way to start combining is to combine the monetary and the material perspectives. So here you have the same categories of countries, low and lower middle, upper middle and high. So now China is in the upper middle, India is combined there with the one on the left, the low and lower middle income countries. It's a very simplistic approach, but and it can be sort of fine-tuned, but it I think does the job. It shows the point. It says, okay, this is the GDP, the combined GDP of these different groups. That's the first row. The second row is how much resources are extracted domestically. So it's very simple. It's not really looking at all these embodied things. It's just how much are these different countries extracting domestically, and then you divide one by the other, and you have $1 per ton. So dollar per ton, it's not the price, right? It's just the amount of money that is generated, the income that is generated using domestic resources, a ton of domestic resources. So it's not a price, that's important. But you can see that there's a big difference here in the ton. So the low and lower middle income countries is much lower than the high income countries. So the high income countries manage to generate a lot more money per ton of domestic extraction. So for the implication is for every unit of resources that the South imports from the North, it will have to export many, many more of those units of material resources in order to pay for it. Yeah? That's sort of the conclusion you can take from here. So already we see we need to combine a little bit more. And here you could also then start making distinctions between net, like the high income countries that are net exporting resources, like Canada, Australia, for example. You can start looking into those groups, and their dollar per ton is actually also quite high. Now, the other one we want to bring in is the labor. So now we are going through labor, and we are saying that, okay, there's also a labor input, the number of workers employed in these different regions. So we add in, that's the direct labor input, is basically employment. 3.4 trillion people in the low and lower middle income countries versus 1.1 trillion in the high income countries. It's roughly matching population sizes differences, but it's sort of the workers, right? And now we have now we have two other sort of derived variables. The first is the dollar per hour of work. That's the monetary expression of labor time. It's basically dollar per hour. We use the dollar per hour. So how again, it's not a wage, it's just saying how much does an hour of labor generate in money, and that's 57.6 in the high income countries on average, and versus 2.6 only in the lower and lower middle income countries. This other one we derive is the ton per hour. It's sort of it's not really an indicator of productivity, but a little bit related in a way, tons per hour. So how many tons of raw materials are being processed and extracted and processed per hour of work. It's more like what you could say a sort of metabolism, so how much raw materials are flowing through this economy. And you see also a bit of a difference, right? So the high income countries, there's more tons per hour that are being that are flowing through. And we can derive the same dollar per ton via these other two. So it's a bit of a mathematical trick, but we come to the same amount of dollars per ton again. But now we have sort of interjected or interposed labor. Because I mean the idea behind it is to say that okay, we don't pay nature, we pay humans to then extract things from nature. So that's the conceptualization behind it. There is a tons per hour, tons of materials extracted per hour of work. That's like the material starting point. There's a payment of dollars per hour, let's say, or sort of monetary realization of money per hour of work. And together they give you the relationship between money and nature, is the concept behind it. So if this is becoming a little bit abstract, but this might maybe help. Then the final, or maybe not, I hope it does, the final step is that we bring back the currency imbalance to then ask two things. We ask two things, we make a hypothetical. So this is the bullets on the left here. What if it took the same amount of time everywhere to earn a unit of money with the same purchasing power? So the ability to buy the same goods. So now we're asking the same kinds of questions we did before, but now we're sort of bringing it all together. So an amount of work to earn money to buy the same material stuff everywhere around the world. We think that that is like an equalized what is it? Dollar per hour. That's the first one. And linked to that is when we have equalized that, what would be the earnings per ton of raw materials if that was equal. So unequal exchange calculations are comparing the current unequal situation with a hypothetical situation. And different approaches define that hypothetical differently. So it could be equal currencies, and some approaches with equal wages. Anyway, so there's different ways to sort of do that, but that's basically the logic behind it. Compare the actual trade with the hypothetical trade if things were equal. And here, what we mean by equal is defined in that way. So we're comparing what an hour of work and a ton of resources generated to what they should have generated. So how much money did an hour of work and a ton of resource generate in actual fact? And we're comparing to what it should have generated if these things were met. I hope that at least conceptually or you grasp the logic a little bit, but and then you sort of implement that logic mathematically, and that's what the table here shows. I'll jump straight to the end. So the dollar per hour equalized is 13.8. So dollar per hour in average in the world is 13.8. What was it? It was, it was at 2.6 for the low income countries and 57 for the high income countries. So average globally is 13.8. And with that, you recalculate these other things, and then you get to the unequal exchange. And this is it. So here you have unequal exchange in actual domestic value. That's the purple one here. Actual domestic value added, money earned, minus the hypothetical money earned. And it gives you this huge losses for the low and low middle income countries and huge gains. For the 40% actually is hidden loss. So it's saying that, sorry, let me put it a bit more concretely. The low and lower middle income countries, in terms of domestic value added, earned 1.6 trillion, is what they earned. Had these things been equalized, they would have earned 8.5 trillion. That's the third from the bottom, equalized domestic value added. So that's a 6.9 difference. And you don't see this obviously in the trade statistics, that's why it's hidden, right? You'd only see the top line. You don't see that what they could have earned or what they would have earned under more equal conditions would have done that. Yeah? And the high income countries earned 11.6. They should have earned only 2.8. As you should, but I mean, you know, based on this sort of hypothetical definition of what is an equal situation. So they should have earned 2.8. That's an 8.8 trillion difference. So you could say that 76% of what they earned thanks to unequal conditions, like the different sort of expressions that I was talking about before. Yeah? So it's a way to try to combine the things. So I was trying to show it like in a diagram that you first have what they actually earned, that gives you a sort of dollar per ton, and you recalculate the dollar per ton using what they should have earned, and that gives you hypothetical earnings, if that makes sense. And I'll wrap up with two quicker ones just to see where I'm heading up next. But one is this: if you divide those gains and losses by people employed, what you see, and this is really, for me, it's like bringing it home, and painfully so, is that in 2022, if you just divide those gains and losses from the previous table across the working populations in different regions, the high-income countries gained $600 per person per month per worker. So thanks to so $600 of my salary on average, right? This is average. I get because of this sort of global appropriation and exploitation system. And that's huge, right? And on the other hand, the low and lower middle income countries forfeit $145 per person per month, which in terms of local purchasing power is huge, right? They can buy a lot for that. So yeah, big surcharges and discounts is one thing, but immediately, you know, I said it's the average. So the next thing that I've been working on here is to see where do we draw the line. There's also workers in the global north that are really exploited in the traditional sense, meaning that the work that they provide is higher than the work that is embodied in the goods that they can buy with their wages. That's like a classic Marxist approach. So it's like the work that you provide in the system and compare that to the work that is embodied in what you consume. And according to my calculations, but it still has to be peer reviewed, I don't know if it will pass, 31 in the high income countries, it's at 31%. So you see that 30% of the wage earners, 31% of the wage earners in the high income countries are exploited in the traditional sense, meaning that they still provide more labor than they get through consumption. But the rest, basically, and I'm there, and I know I'm sort of above that line in terms of income and what I buy, so I'm a net appropriator of labor from the rest of the world. Marxists call it the labor aristocracy, or others are talking about the imperial mode of living. It's made possible because we extract more from elsewhere. Oh, yeah, and in the low-income countries, low and lower middle-income countries, no worker is appropriating more labor than they are providing, even though there's a little light blue jump at the end. Yes?
But then the imperial mode of living, I think it comes out of the fact that we are able to consume these cheap commodities, right? Like the bundle of goods are artificially cheapened, and that's why we're able to have this kind of living.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
I think so. That maybe more. So this may be a slight reinterpretation of the imperial mode of living, but it's the same cause. Marxists say that capitalism only works when workers provide more work than they can buy with their wages. And the difference is called surplus value, and that surplus value is captured by the capitalists, and they transform this into profits, and they can accumulate. And capitalism only works if there's a difference. And with this, in the paper, I show that that's true in the total picture, but some groups are able to escape that. Some groups of workers, so this is just the workers, right? It's not the capitalist profits, it's just wages. So the inequality is worse when you're bringing in the capitalist class here. It's just looking at laborers. But the sort of imperial mode of living, or the labor aristocracy thesis, says that some workers are able to escape that logic, and they can actually take more value, labor value, through their wages, because they import, goods from cheaper goods with much more embodied labor from the global south. So yes, in global picture, it's true that in this case, I forgot the exact number, but that the global labor force provides more work than they can buy with their wages. The rest is appropriated by capitalist class in the form of surplus value, and then that becomes profit. But yeah, the distribution is interesting. And there's all sorts of political implications, like do workers in the global north, do they have a material solidarity with workers in the global south? Or are they actually complicit with are they actually benefiting from the exploitation in the south in a material sense, right? Not moralistically, like you could have moral problems with this, but at least from a material perspective, I'm benefiting from the exploitation because I'm above 31, I'm above the 31 line. But it's interesting politically in terms of, like, Marxists are fighting a lot about this stuff. They disagree a lot because they want to have the common enemy, all workers in the world unite against this common enemy. But the question is, for a big chunk of the workers in the global north, and even a small part in the sunny part, like the upper middle income countries, the semi-periphery, they are benefiting from the material perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would be correct to say that. So maybe another question would be, why is labor less expensive than technology, let's say, in this sense?
That's a good question.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the premium is coming from the technology in the global north.
Yeah.
And labor is coming from the south. So why is the premium, or the higher premium is coming through technology but not through labor?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting discussion, complicated one too. Regarding the first point, so it can also be that it's not just that wages are low, it could also be that profits are low. So if you're like a company in the global south, maybe you can't take on too much profit because you will be outcompeted, someone else will do it somewhere else. And also taxes and other things. So it's not just wages, but it's the whole system of production that will be sort of would be sort of undermined, I think. So there's one comment on what you're saying, and the other one was, there's a big debate about this, about productivity, that productive in terms of mechanization, automation happening especially in the rich countries, and that you can have a discussion about like a cause and effect, but according to a lot of Marxists, this automation happens because wages were starting to go up in the global north, and because the workers were sort of organized more and more, and that meant that it's better to replace them with a machine. And I read a quote recently from a World Bank report on Bangladesh, and they were saying that if your abundant resource is labor, then in the garment sector, then use like manual, like these seamstresses, that's just manual work, then that's your comparative advantage, and you should do that. Don't mechanize, don't innovate, because you have this abundant resource, and that's your comparative advantage, so you should use that. So it's basically saying, if you have cheap labor, then yeah, don't mechanize, because that's just a wasted investment. Yeah, and you can also, it's important to note that there's also a debate about this. They're saying, yeah, okay, there is this drain of labor, but look, we are in the global north, we're producing way more goods with just 1 hour of work. So you need to think about productivity difference, and you need to account for that in the calculations. So there's a whole, there's another chapter there to think about. Okay, we sort of reached for the past. Any last comments or thoughts? I think we should maybe call it a day then. If you have any reactions or thoughts afterwards that you'd like to share, I think we're sharing the presentation. Feel free to reach out as well if you have some other thoughts and things come up. Thanks for the inputs. All right. Thank you.